We are live.
All right, non-standard appropriations. We're going through some language changes and language in general of the big bill, the FY26 budgets. So I'll let you introduce yourself for the record and give us an overview of this language.
Sure. So Kirby Keaton, Legislative Counsel. This is some language I was asked to draft for the budget that addresses the issue of whether at the federal level there's going to be changes in the law or just changes in interpretation of the law that would possibly cause some currently tax-exempt organizations to lose that status. And the way that Vermont law is linked up with federal law, some of the fallout from that would flow through Vermont law if that happened in the next year. So this is drafted to just apply to this current calendar year we're in for tax matters between April 1st and December 31st of this year. It would direct the Department of Taxes to apply federal law as it was either written or interpreted as of April 1st of this year instead of any changes going forward. So if a Vermont organization were to lose that status over the next year, when it came to say Vermont corporate income tax or land gains tax or such as on Meals and Rooms tax and some other things, that Vermont would still treat them as a tax-exempt organization. And then by running out on December 31st of this year, it would allow the General Assembly to take a look at it next session and make any permanent changes necessary if there's any drastic changes.
This kind of protects a Vermont entity. They would still might lose their federal tax exempt status, but this would keep, at least for this tax year that we're in, keep it steady for this year.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of unknowns with this, and the process to audit an organization and then the appeals process that follows could mean that maybe this isn't necessary. Maybe any organization that this happens to would still be in the appeals process and therefore have not lost their status by the end of the year. But just in case it does happen, that's what this is for.
Yeah. Just protection. Okay, any questions about or concerns about adding this in? So their census is time sensitive, we're going to add it to the budget.
So since it's entirely Vermont and how it forces its own tax laws, there's no interaction with federal law other than the trigger of a change in federal law would not affect us.
Right. This wouldn't change any federal treatment, but it would just make it so that that federal treatment doesn't flow through to Vermont. Right. And it might put the Department of Taxes into a position where they'll have to interpret federal law, so to speak, in order to they'll have to apply, well, what were things like on April 1st and see if that applies to that organization to make that decision. So it does put them in an awkward situation, but who else is there to, make that call?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Kirby. So now, Grady Nixon. So how do you want to do this, Grady? Because people have things that they want to propose, or you want to run through them in some way?
Yeah, so thank you, Grady Nixon, Joint Fiscal Office. I have a packet of sort of committee language, things we've discussed with Sharon offline that I think everyone has signed on to. So we can go through that, and then we can go through the individual committee members' proposals. First, it might be helpful to just go through the sections that are still open from the last time we reviewed the budget language. So there's a number of sections that the committee had not closed out yet that are currently in the House version of the budget.
So if we had a printed version from before, that's still viable?
Yes.
416 draft?
Yes.
So people did have at one point a draft that looked like this. 416 and 214. It's also on the website, I think.
Yes, it should be.
Is it under today? Probably not.
Not that copy, but I can find it.
Well, people could look it up under Trady's name, find it.
So my version I'm working off is just slightly different, so, my pages might not align exactly, but on or around page 40, section E 100.2 is the first one I would flag. And these first four, I'll just mention for the committee that they're open, but they relate to fiscal year 2025 closeout. And some of the e-board JFC discussions of authority there, that Emily will touch on later. So I'm not going to go through those sections right now, just flag for the committee that E 100.2, E 127, E 127.1, and E 127.2 all relate to that JFC e-board authority / FY25 closeout. So those will be closed out or dealt with pending committee decisions on what Emily discusses with you later on.
So that would be also this language, in this version on page, this is right before the E section.
Which page?
E 103 section, is that one of the sections you said?
E 100.2, E 127, E 127.1, and E 127.2 are all open. You're correct, there is language relating to the closeout in D 103, but the committee already decided to remove that, so.
I don't have.
It's on the bottom of page 31 for E 100.2.
Alright.
Basically, we're gonna have new language that'll address those issues about year end.
Wait a second.
She looked different, she did.
I have 416, but.
Oh, sorry, that document is just the budget adjustment, that's not, sorry.
So this one is just the budget adjustment.
Yes, sorry.
I got
Okay,
that.
you got that.
Oh,
So,
yeah, this is budgetization.
This one?
493, H.
Oh, yeah, or the one that's listed as passed by the House,
Yes, sorry.
H
Also
49.
online now.
Okay, but all that stuff in the BAA is in this version,
Not the version you're looking at,
so this
it's,
is just what the House did.
right, so all the BA stuff will be in your bill tomorrow.
do we have another copy somewhere?
Is this what you're still looking at, basically using the House passed by, or?
Yes.
There's a new version?
The House passed version.
Phil, I have the full bill. Do you want the full bill?
If it includes what we're talking about?
Just
Just gotta highlight it, that's all.
Well, this is more pages.
Oops, sorry.
Okay. And so we are in
E 100.2,
31.
okay, got it.
so yeah, E 100.2, E 127, E 127.1, and E 127.2 all deal with FY25 closeout or the e-board JFC authority. So that will be discussed later, but for the committee's awareness, those sections are still open.
And in E 101.1,
Yes, so I believe the committee decided to remove that language from the bill.
101,
Yes,
well, we had new language from that Jen Carvey had worked out, and we were gonna put in here, and then at one point we were talking to HS like if they have changes. The goal was to keep that language in, but do the new language, the Carvey language.
okay, I can bring that forward for the committee later.
And it would be HS, not the Secretary of Administration. So we never heard back from Rich on the Carvey language?
They liked it.
Huh?
They don't think they liked it.
But they didn't give us. Okay.
Okay, and then, another chunk of sections, E133, E134, E134.1, and E134.2, as well as E514.1. Those all deal with VPIC, and they were left open pending committee decisions on, the VPIC compensation.
Well, we didn't put the VPIC compensation in the budget, so we don't need the language. We're not gonna- Unless there's something in there that doesn't need money.
Okay, so there was the VPIC compensation, authority language that was in there, and then the numbers for VPIC would change pending those committee discussions, but if the committee made those decisions, then those sections can be closed out.
Yeah, we didn't keep them, there's no money in the budget for it, so.
Okay. Then the next section would be E215. So if you're looking at the full version of the House bill, this would be on page 149. This is annual language relating to the National Guard tuition benefit program. The House reduced it from 1.3 million to 1.2 million.
Which section?
What number are you on?
E215.
No, you're supposed to have it.
Oh, this is one.
So they say.
Are you going in order? Just gonna go back. E131.2, the capital debt portability advisory committee.
Yes, so I believe the committee agreed to accept the technical section that was in the technical letter from the administration.
Which was not changed to biennially, or, because I thought that was the question, whether to make it biennial or not biennial.
The technical recommendation in the administration's letter wasn't changing it from biennial to not biennial. I'd have to go back and look at the letter, but it was a more minor tweak. And then there was a repetition of a word that they recommended striking.
So we made the technical changes, but there was a question about, that I had flagged, whether it should be a biennial report or an annual report. That the House changed it from annual to biennial.
Yes.
And I remember we had a question of whether it should be biennial, but maybe we do want them to issue an annual.
Right, so the language as it currently is, says there's a biennial report, an interim report on years when the biennial report isn't published, and then the
Does it
governor.
not make it annual?
Yeah.
You would do it every 2 years, except in between the 2 years you do another.
Yes, and you could request an additional report if you'd like.
You could do even a third, you could do it every year plus another.
Yes,
So why do it that way? Why not just say it's an annual? We don't,
you'd have to ask the office of the treasurer.
but the House did this on recommendation of the treasurer.
Yes.
Okay.
I believe the letter from, the policy letter, the European letter said that the government did not like it.
Yeah, but maybe that's what I
Didn't like moving.
thought it should be, that they thought it should be an annual, that they meet to talk about the debt affordability, but, because that's what creates how much the capital bill is.
Yeah,
But what's in the interim, does it say what's in the interim report that's in between the biennial reports? Or does it just say an interim report shall be provided?
I was gonna say is an interim report
It shall be
different
provided.
from a,
Just shall be provided. Okay, well, we can, if people wanna figure it out, we can, or we can talk to the treasurer and others that have an opinion on this and see if there's any change that we can make in the conference committee. Because we're making some changes to this section on the second one. Right, so in the Dear Jane letter, they thought there might be an issue with credit rating agencies. Yeah, could be a negative view from rating agencies. Well, why don't we make the change so then a conference committee is clear that it's the difference between the two, that we just keep it as an annual report.
Okay, so strike that section.
Well, unless there's anything else that they're, I guess, I don't know if there's anything else in here that they do other than make it, I guess they make it annual. And then they have the interim report, which makes, and then they have the governor emergency support can request an off-cycle report, which is also called the interim report. So we're striking the section, yes.
Massive bargaining chip.
There's also one other change they make. They make a couple other changes, so maybe they'll just cut all that stuff about the annual, because on the next page, they talk about some other, there's some other changes in here about metrics, the capital asset depreciation ratio. So we can keep those changes.
Okay.
So we're just gonna make it we're gonna keep it as an annual report.
Then back to 215. So, as I mentioned, the House reduced this number from 1.3 million to 1.2 million for the National Guard tuition benefit program.
And that's actual usage as opposed to.
I believe that was the House's understanding.
But we moved it back.
Okay, so then that's close out with it being moved back to 1.3 million.
Yeah.
The next open section I have is section E 300.1, the report on residential beds for youth.
The Global Commitments Appropriations Report 301.1, is that it?
300.1.
I don't have a 300.1. I have a 301.
There's a,
Oh, it is, I see. Is there a reason why we wanted to keep that up open, do you know, Senator Lyons?
Which one?
E 300.1, a report for the residential beds for youth. We kept that section open when we went through it before.
Well, the question is the facility being completed and built? I don't see anything wrong with leaving it in.
Yeah, I didn't have a note here.
Yeah, no, I think it's perfectly good.
Okay, so we're closing out
Okay.
E 300.1.
On section E 306, I believe Senator Westman had a request on this section.
Yeah, the first line in the letter, the Dear Jane letter, this is what they said. DEPA's Division of Rate Setting follows healthcare administrative rules to assess the need for emergency financial relief as submitted by nursing home. As such, the language under the section A conflicts with established procedures as we request that it be struck. So only the first line in 306 would be struck, and instead you'd start on or before December 15th, and it would go on and get the report back. It's only because it conflicts with what they already do, and they're now how many years into emergency financial relief, Jenny?
I'm sorry,
How many years have they been in, done emergency financial relief for nursing homes?
I don't remember, a long time.
A long time, and they've been fairly successful at it. So they would request that the first line be taken out, and I don't know why we would get in the way of what they've been doing. If it's, we haven't lost nursing homes, and they still would report back.
So it looked like in their letter, they talked about all of A, but you're suggesting just this first sentence.
Well, they, Well, if you did
It's just a report.
all of A, it gets the report.
Okay, so just the first sentence.
The first sentence is the most important part. If we,
Well, the report we want, right?
well, we could take it out and let the House fight for it.
You're talking about taking the first sentence out,
Well, I'm talking,
Yeah.
or the whole?
first in sentence is the most important
Yeah, it
part.
is.
If we take all of A out, then the House can fight for something,
Okay,
whatever.
I thought we, oh, I guess it's not.
But it's that first sentence that is the sticker.
Right.
What is it about it exactly that's?
Well, they follow a procedure. They follow the healthcare administrative rules, to assess the need. They have a particular report and they do in that. And, apparently this conflicts, but they're being told there, conflicts with what the practice has been. The nursing homes report all of their financial information to the healthcare administrative rules, and that's what they use to do this. And this says, this apparently conflicts with that. So I just don't know why we get in the way of that.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I'm sure they're operating within state rules and federal regulations.
Yes, that's what the nursing homes
Yeah.
and DEVA is doing. And we've been doing this now for 3 or 4 years, at least.
they had a little, well, not even a reprieve during the pandemic.
Right.
Maybe it's the rare occasions, or maybe it's last resort, or maybe it's,
Well, if the House has good language, they'll come back to us. But I don't know why we get in the way of the process.
I'm okay taking it out. Anybody objects, let me know. So we'll just take out the first sentence.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, and then the last batch of open sections I have all relate to adult ed. So the committee kept E504 through E504.3 open pending discussions and decisions on adult education.
I do have some opinion about this. Here's what I would say. We changed the law last year, and everybody expected, as we changed the law and put new money in, that the Agency of Education was going to use the same formula they had used to hand the money back out to adult basic education. They apparently weren't happy with everything we did in statute last year, so they changed the formula. And it would be my suggestion that instead of sending the money to the Agency of Education, we would send it to the Department of Labor and have them hand the money out to the 5 adult basic education organizations. And if to move out around education. And in the fall, in December, we're supposed to have a report back on how we should distribute this money. And so we'll be looking at a new formula based upon bringing all the players together and working together around this. So instead of having to worry about how the money gets handed out and how, I have language here, but I was going to direct it through the Agency of Administration, but after with having conversations with Joint Fiscal, they suggested that we send it to the Department of Labor and have Labor hand the money out. So at least for this year, until we struggle with the new formula, which will be based on the report in December, it would be my hope that we could move it to the Department of Labor.
Anybody have a problem with that?
I'm just wondering, have they ever done similar work? Hasn't this always been AOE?
Yeah.
This has always been AOE, but there is, I would say there's been conflict between AOE and the adult basic education organizations. And, no one expected there to be a formula change, as of last year, and it just adds to the conflict between.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if I were Secretary of Labor and this switched, I might go to the Secretary of Education and ask what was going on and how I should deal with it. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some cross-pollination there and suddenly we start to see the same administration response to how to hand the money out. Can we, instead of putting it to a new agency, can we put more guardrails on it so that it?
Well, that was gonna be my other suggestion. We still give it to AOU, but just say it shall be divided specifically.
Or we could do that in the conference committee. That would give us more time to think about this, and we could do that in the conference committee. I think my point really is we're not happy with the adult basic education organizations. Feel like they're being put upon.
Are we making a change for the dollar amounts? That was.
No.
It's just, we kept them open because of this
Yeah.
construct.
No, I don't think there's any change in the dollars.
Well, it'd be good if we made a change, then it would be a clear thing that we talk about in the conference committee. So make a change. Change the capitalize some random word.
Okay,
I don't know, based on this, maybe there's some part of it we can add in.
so I believe Senator Weston has the language he had drafted.
Well, but that's to send it directly to the,
No, this was to send it to the agency of administration.
oh, right.
It was suggested to me that it would be better if it went to labor.
I mean, you could say it's the Department of Labor and we'll figure that out in conference.
And I'm happy if we, do more guidelines. I just think that right now it's,
Okay, then I guess, Senator Lyons has.
I have three, actually. So I'll start with 312, E312. This is, something that I think we talked about in committee. I don't know how many are there.
E312 0 or E312?
Point one, so it's a prevention expenditures report. So we had talked in here about the different funds, special funds and other funds available for prevention programs. So this asks for a report and an update on what state and federal funds are available, including special funds for prevention efforts. And then to look at those funds that have been appropriated, those are obligated, and then the programs that are being supported. So it's more of a comprehensive analysis of what we always seem to get confused about when we start talking about prevention.
So my E312.1 is the executive branch positions for the Department of Health Equity Advisory.
Yeah, please disregard that. This would be an entirely new section. It would be E312.x, yeah.
Okay.
Point 4.
You don't have this one. This is something that
Looks like it'd be
I can talk about it.
312.5.
Point five.
Okay,
There's a 312.5.
there already is.
It's on page 76.
Oh, yeah, 312.6, 312.7,
Oh,
312. 312.
312.8 maybe.
So, right here, 9. Because then it goes to 316 for the. Okay,
You want this one?
so it's study. And have you talked with these agencies? They're excited to do this report.
Department of Health and the Agency of Human Services. I think we started the conversation when the tobacco folks were in, and when we talked about cannabis a little bit.
Okay, anybody have any problems with this thing? Okay. So we'll add that in.
Okay, and this one comes from the agency,
CIA.
yeah, CIA. So various requests for eligibility determinations. The first one, working people with disabilities, and it seems to me this might be getting a step ahead of where we need to be, should there be changes in Medicaid. So the statutory requirement right now is that, as you can see, for the explanation of number 1, you want me to read it all?
No, just tell us what it is.
And then the income-based continuous enrollment piece. This is codifying what would currently happen.
So it makes it a little easier to verify that you're self-employed.
Yeah. And then continuous
So
enrollment.
would you say all these are kind of technical?
I think, well, I'm not sure that they're technical, but they will put, it looks to me like they're putting things in place that are currently happening. And then the emergency rulemaking piece is important as changes happen to to law, federal law. We might need some emergency rulemaking. We talked about this a little bit in committee today, actually. And then annual open enrollment.
What is that?
Extends that to January instead of December. And that again is, I think most of these are responding to
None of
some
these
the.
have fiscal impact.
No, but it is responding to what's happening or has happened at the federal level.
Why is the first one the de minimis? What would be the fiscal impact, the de minimis fiscal impact of the self-employment verification? You
You want to
know,
speak to that? We don't know. It's new.
that's what it says. Again, it's not evident why. Maybe more people will be able to get that determination, but I don't know what that would mean.
There's no estimate provided in the memo, but because it is making it technically less restrictive, I assume that the de minimis
Right.
theoretically could have some.
The impact of more people getting this determination is. For Medicaid.
Well, it might be,
Maybe our
it
Medicaid
might be a
match.
balance between reduced administrative cost and reduction in funds overall.
Okay. Well, we're taking
You'll have to ask.
HS's
I
word
will.
for it. that it's
Yeah,
de
I'm gonna
minimis.
have to
And then
ask.
when they say de minimis, they
Yeah.
mean small. For the normal person. Okay, Noah, do you have anything to say about anything?
I know nothing about this language.
Okay. Did you look at it?
Yeah, I looked at it, but I haven't had time to like follow up with them or call them or understand what they're just trying to do.
You didn't freak out when you read it?
I freak out when I read it. No.
I mean, it seems fine to me. Anybody else have any questions or concerns about adding these requests from HS is for?
I do have a question, I'm supportive of this, but around the rulemaking request, that I'm just less familiar with the emergency rule process. Does it have shorter notices or something?
Usually when you make an emergency rule, there's a need for that. There has to be an emergency in place. So this is relating to any potential, looking forward to any potential federal changes or state or federal law that would require immediate, rule changes. I can't say what they are. This is a request from Medicaid for that, and I'm thinking about what the conversation is at the federal level regarding Medicaid. I mean, it could be work requirements, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I that makes sense to me and I'm supportive of it. I just, it says the agency may use the emergency rule process pursuant to the statute. I'm less familiar with.
Usually when you have an emergency,
Yeah.
there's a definitive emergency, and this
Yeah.
is anticipating something that
Uh-huh.
we could
Yeah,
see as a critical.
right. Oh, agreed.
I have been involved in emergency rule and it does greatly shorten that.
Okay,
like,
It's short
timelines.
Yeah.
Usually it's about 18 months to get rules in place. With emergency rules, they can come out really very quickly. And then they go into effect regardless of any decision made by LCAR. Oh, yes, they do.
Okay.
So you're on Alcar and you're okay with it? Yes, Emily?
I was just throwing on the emergency rules language. So that language was in the big bill every year for the last 10 years related to the implementation of Vermont Health Connect. And then this year they were like, we've never used it, we don't need it. And then the conversations at the federal level started happening. And I think this is in the event that there is a major change in Medicaid or something related to the Health Connect, that this would give DEVA the ability to make rules quickly to react to that. Otherwise, we would be in a sort of limbo.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll add these in.
And then I have one more. It's a request from Department of Children and Families to change the date for rule making from 25 to 26 for some of the rules that they are responsible for. If we don't change the date, they will have to make 2 sets of rules in the same year.
So you're not amending a current additional language?
No.
I think
That's all I got.
just change 25 to 26. Implementing. They would become effective a year later.
So they would have to repeat a stakeholder engagement process to do it twice within 1 year. So if they can do it once and have it count, they don't have to make rules twice.
There's a lot of rules here. With all these rules.
Act 154. Do you know Act
This was
154? This is from Act 154, rulemaking. I don't know, I just got this, so I got it a while ago, escaped me.
Is it H 154?
Act
Actual
154.
act from last year.
Sorry, I just got handed this, I'll try and.
Let me just see what this.
Yeah, it'd be good to know what it is.
Let me find out what it is before we do this.
Okay, so we'll wait on that. Do you have anything else, Chris?
I believe Senators Norris and Caruth still have language as well.
Okay. Senator Norris, do you want to tell us what it is?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Basically, Grady wrote this up in regards to E208 Department of Public Safety, their capital plan or lack thereof. Under A, it says that's part of the fiscal year 2027 budget presentation, Department of Public Safety shall submit a capital plan for replacement of firearms and mobile and portable equipment to the House and Senate Committees on Appropriations, rather than just simply coming in and asking for quite a lot of money
Right.
without any basis for this. I'd like to have it be a little more organized.
And this is something you brought up before, it's the same issue.
Same issue.
Sounds good. Anybody have any questions about supplying a capital plan for duty firearm replacement and radio?
Good idea.
This is your chance to give Norris a hard time.
I like to, but.
Is it considered part of the Norris proposal?
It
Part
kind
of
of
it
is.
is no new positions with this.
Okay. I'm good with that. Add that in. Ruth, what do you have?
I have two.
No.
No and no. First is state colleges. And
Our state together, that's a good thing.
Oh,
no,
I think I might
I don't
have,
know if there's one for me.
oh, that's all.
Do you have another copy?
Yeah, but I can run you the computer.
Here, you can have, I can look it up.
So, what this is addressing is going back to the Blue Ribbon Commission. A plan came out of there that was firmed up first in House Appropriations and Senate Appropriations. And the idea was to match the hundreds of millions of dollars that we were giving state colleges with systemic structural deficit reform. So what that imagined, going back 5 years, was every year there would be 5 million in structural deficit reduction to accompany the other pots of money that we were giving them. And so starting last year, they accomplished this for the first 3 years. Then last year they were having luck with their enrollment. And as you'll see, you can reduce your annual operating structural deficit with increased enrollment revenues. So last year their enrollments were picking up and they had gotten to a point where they were going to be cutting maybe into the bone. And so we reduced the payment that they had to do last year. And I'm suggesting a similar reduction this year. So if this language were to pass, they have met their targets, structural reduction targets for the state. But that would not preclude them cutting to the extent that they see going forward. It just takes out our target of the last 1.5 million. So they will have cut 18,500,000 by the end of fiscal year 2026. And this is a way of acknowledging that their faculty has been through a great deal. They have reorganized, many of them have moved, some accepted buyout arguments, offers. So this is a way of acknowledging two things, that we're ending our targets for structural deficit reduction, but also we're acknowledging that their enrollments have picked up significantly in the last 2 years.
Okay. Stay with me. Last one's a hard no.
No, I like it. He did good.
And
Okay, any questions? Okay, I'll add that in.
okay, so then this one is about childcare. And I'm just gonna keep yours, Andy, because of, I don't want to go back too far, but I will say that, the administration, going back to 3 years ago when we were doing this legislation, originally the administration was hoping to spend less on it than our Health and Welfare Committee and this committee wanted to spend. Ultimately, we did override the governor's veto on this. And so what this seeks to prevent is in the BAA and the budget, the administration wanted to go to the general fund amount that is deeded to childcare and reduce it and then move that money to other places. It seemed to me that that would very quickly become a standard move on the administration's part, just to reduce the general fund amount for childcare and force childcare to depend just upon the payroll tax, which was never the envisioned aggregate amount. So a couple things happen here. If I could just ask you to look to the second page, page 2. So what we're doing here is reversing. Instead of the governor taking 19 million from the general fund portion, this has the governor taking the 19 million from the child care contribution special fund. And so it preserves the general fund amount, and elsewhere in the budget that's reflected. Then on page 1, the overage, or what looks as though it may be an overage in that fund, is used to create a reserve of 5 million. You remember that the Adam Gresham and the administration had proposed the caseload reserve fund as something that could be tapped in the event that uptake was higher than anticipated. So this makes that unnecessary by creating a reserve in the child care contribution special fund itself. So it doesn't, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, Grady, this doesn't change the amounts being spent. It does a couple of structural things. One is it protects the general fund amount deeded to childcare, and 2, it creates a reserve in the special fund so that we don't have to deal with this issue next year if there's a need to tap funds. And then the last one is on the third page. That is just switching out the new name for the fund, Child Care Financial Assistance Program, as opposed to Child Care Families. And then the committee knows there are a couple of other one-time pieces of funding that we've talked about elsewhere, but these are the kind of structural moves, don't affect the bottom line, but they, in my mind, they bolster and secure the child care program. Oh, where's the, and the eligibility language changed elsewhere from 4.9 in the House to 5.9, and that's in
Not an eligibility, but the subsidy or the.
Yeah, the subsidy. So with that, that's what this does.
Okay. Seems aligned with what we've been talking about. Any questions?
I have a question. Is it possible to open a window?
I don't know if it is.
More in here.
We could open the door. Would that help or not?
Pretty loud out there.
Yeah, one still has the storm doors on, so it wouldn't have much of an impact.
All right. Just gotta tough it out.
Don't lean back.
You could shut the
You
drape,
could shut the grates, yeah.
or
Yeah.
not drapes,
That would
the
help.
blinds. Which would probably, so Amy doesn't get sunburned.
Oh, it's better already.
Yeah, tremendous.
Do you want the window open?
You could just shut the
I had my
top part
druthers.
on the second half if you want.
You're good, I'm
Move.
Okay, you can, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Last minute.
Yeah, you could put this in.
It's a joke for the live stream. We're gonna bring out the trash.
Okay.
Bring it to
Beautiful.
Pandemonium.
That's good.
Okay,
I say to the whole.
I think that was the pro tem's effort to just confuse us, so we would vote for his. Okay, we're okay with all that, Sean?
His
Feeling?
stuffy language just kept.
Okay. So we're adding that in. Anything else, Grady?
Yeah, so now, I have a packet.
Packets. Can you just
And
type them in?
I have information on this one when I do that.
Yeah, because I won't be able to find it. It's in here somewhere.
So on page 1 here,
I don't have my packet.
It's also online.
Okay, I'm doing
It's on the
this.
presentation.
Okay, I have it.
on page 1 here, just highlighted, you'll see this is, the ARPA, pullback language that is currently in the budget. There's some concern, that pulling it back, pulling the unexpended and unencumbered, ARPA cure general fund dollars, in the middle of that construction season could create an issue. So this just pushes that pullback back by 6 months.
Does it matter at all, Grady, if this is some of the ARPA money that was converted to general fund?
Right, so
It is general
it's
fund.
yes, it's those funds.
So they don't have to follow the December 26th.
Exactly.
ARPA.
So this refers to those funds that were, quote unquote, cured. On page 3 and continuing on page 5, this is more or less a repeat of language that the Joint Fiscal Office requested and included in last year's budget. This is, it would be the completion of a 3-year fee report cycle. So in the current fiscal year, the fee report was for agencies and departments that fall under the protection for persons and property part of the budget. This would be for those entities that fall under the general government part. So anything that gets appropriated funds in sections B100 through 199, 400 through 599, and 800 through 999. So this is just outlining what that fee report will be.
So there's always, this is in every budget for years, some version of it.
Yes, so rather than requesting just one big broad fee report and getting insufficient information, this is the 3rd year where you'd be requesting for a smaller group of entities to submit a fee
Because we used
report.
to do like every 3 years, do everybody.
Right.
That seems like a smart idea.
On page 6, so this would be language making certain rate increases effective on November 1st rather than on July 1st. So you'll see that appropriations made in a number of B sections relating to rate increases for community providers and for FQHCs and RHCs would take effect on November 1st, 2025.
What will that do to the appropriations?
Same dollar amount, but they would take effect on November 1st, giving us a chance to see what the federal government's going to do by September 1st and then have the October 1st and then have a month to react if there's a huge shortfall. I think this is about $45 million that would be held till November 1st. Basically, protect or give us the ability to make decisions if there's a huge decrease in federal funds, because we might have different priorities. If there's,
What happens to the providers? I'm just, this is, you're holding money for a period of time, what's going on with the providers who are not getting that money.
It would be on this year's rates until November first.
So I think first underlines point, some added clarity. It could say, it could specify that the rate increases funded by those appropriations shall not take effect until November 1st, rather than as it's currently phrasing the appropriations.
I have to think about this one. I mean, this is not healthy, I think, for our FQHCs and our primary care in particular. Where we can lose some businesses and some providers very quickly. Where did this come from?
This is what we talked about the other day. Senator Weston had kind of brought it up as a suggestion of how do we prepare ourselves for potential much larger federal reductions in federal funds that would make. So there's two things we could do. We could either not make a whole bunch of appropriations and take $45 million and just not appropriate it and set it aside for the next budget adjustment or next budget, or we could appropriate it and have some wait till we have more. That's what the idea here is. Let's appropriate it, but then have it go in effect after the first quarter, where we'll have more information.
Does this include the stabilization grants for providers?
No, those are one time.
Right, so those guys will be okay. So then, does it include the gap funding for the year when we're losing the ACO, which is pretty critical for as primary care docs, especially? I'm very concerned about this, I have to say. I know it sounds like a good idea to hold the money for a period of time, but in the meantime, you've got people who are providing medical services and not being reimbursed at a rate that will allow for them to survive.
Emily, do you have on your sheet where you had, we were working on, which ones were going to go into the delayed implementation? You don't have those marked on there. So I was just wondering if we would be able to go over this on your.
I can flag, I mean, it's easy to flag them on my sheet. It's, these 3 lines on the page adjustments.
A lot of
Okay, so we can leave it open. I think it would be easier to look at when we go over the spreadsheet. And then we can decide if there's any changes, if there's different sections or appropriations that we don't want to include in this conflict. Yeah, Senator Weston first.
I just personally say, none of us want to do this. But with, I think none of us have ever faced the idea that we could lose so much money in Medicaid, and what do we do?
Yeah, $200
I
million in Medicaid, a lot of bigger problems. Yeah, we'll look at it, and I think it'll help if you see specifically on the spreadsheet, because just the B sections, unless you do it every year, you don't even know what those mean, but if you see it on the spreadsheet, you know.
Okay.
Senator Watson?
So I was trying to do a little cross-referencing of, okay, so what are the sections and what are they doing? I had remembered the conversation being about forward dating some one-time money. But this is, some base, allocations. So, any thinking about why this section, or are there, as opposed to one-time?
So I believe there is still committee discussion over forward dating other one-time appropriations. This is just relating to FY26 rate increases for certain providers.
Okay. I think I
It'll
understand.
include more than this.
I see. Thank you.
The question is it rate increases or is it stabilizing rates as a result of the loss of the ACO? And so I will be very interested to look at those line items to understand the effect.
That is a clear delineation, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we'll leave it open until we get clarity on which things we're including in it.
On
I
page,
agree with that.
Okay, so that's right.
Yeah.
Did you have a comment on it? Okay, go ahead, Chris.
on page 7, this would be 2 sections, relating to fee increases for, the Attorney General. The Office of the Attorney General built their budget assuming, that this language would, be incorporated somewhere, that these, so their budget was built with these fee increases assumed. I think it would total an amount of approximately $42,000. So this language would just align, statute to make sure that the Attorney General's budget, is balanced.
Okay. Did they bring this up in the BA?
I don't,
When they did the presentation? Okay, because it does sound familiar. Okay. That's the same on page 8.
yep. And then on pages 9, 10, and 11, this is an amendment, to JFC, grant acceptance. So it's just adding on page 10, you'll see 2 instances of or placed on the committee's agenda. So it says, when the General Assembly is in session within 30 days of receipt of the copy of an approval and related information required under subdivision D2, a member of the committee requests that such a grant, gift, loan, sum of money, or a thing of value be held for legislative approval or placed on the committee's agenda.
Yeah, and this is going to basically bring the statute in line with the practice of the joint fiscal committee. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, there is some language that I'll be presenting. It's been in the budget, it's $50,000 to the Secretary of State for civics and journalism. You know, the Secretary of State has been doing more civics outreach and education. And there was a bill that's not going to pass this year that was going to require the state to use 80% of their advertising dollars on local media as a way to helping local media. This $50,000 would be awards for journalism organizations. Could be an online entity or could be a print legacy entity. And the Secretary of State worked with the UVM Community News Service, started 2 years ago. And they would assemble a panel of people that wouldn't be eligible for the award, kind of like a panel of judges, to recognize local journalism that's advancing civics. So if they're, even if they're covering the local select board or elections or anything like that. And the awards would be issued through the Secretary of State's office, but they wouldn't have any say in who gets the award.
And I missed the first part, so the bill, the 80% bill, is that not going in?
Not going in.
And so you'll see that in the 110 section tomorrow when you review the bill.
I think that's a great idea, by the way.
Okay.
The request on the part of the Family Services Division is with regard to a bill that we did pass last year.
218.
On the Registry for Child Abuse and Neglect. And so essentially there's a whole rulemaking section, which is listed here at 4922. And all of the everything that you see listed, well, you don't see it because I have it here. Everything that was there was supposedly to have rules begin to be promulgated, to be in place, or at least reviewed by 2025, September 1st. They're asking to put it off to 26. in the event that the rules were in place by 25, then the registry and all the conditions around child abuse and neglect registration would go forward if the rules were done in 25, then the whole thing would go forward in 26. And what this says is that the rules will be completed in 26, and then everything in the subchapter will be effective, I have a cold, can't help it, will be effective in 27. That's a delay, it's a big delay for that registry that took a long time to negotiate and discuss. So I will take the responsibility of talking with the Family Services Division. I'm not sure that this doesn't help things go forward.
Right.
It's
So
a
that's-
concern. So
That's just, they had more than one, or was that their only?
this is it. Yeah, this is the copy, and maybe we could get it copied. People can look at it.
Okay,
But it's Act 154 from last year.
but this is about,
That's my only thought.
but this is the one that, so, but you're saying we need to think about it, so we're not.
I do think we should think about it. I think there'll be a lot of concerns from the folks who worked on the bill in the first place. I certainly don't want to put a huge burden on Family Services Division for getting this done, but it's something I think that needs doing.
So that for holding aside,
Hold that
and
one.
everything else, and except for this delayed appropriations section, we are moving forward. Did you have other language, or is that something different?
So I have some language, I can hand out. Jen Harvey drafted this. This relates to, the qualified Medicare beneficiary program, raising the income threshold from 145% of that PL to 150%.
Quimby.
Where is it come? This is the Quimby thing?
This is the Quimby thing.
So the Quimby has always been in the budget. This is just the language that enacts it.
This is amending last year's language that put it at 150, or 145.
Well, this is the administrative alignment.
Yeah.
Where it was 145 and 150, so it was a pain because they had to have two different.
Yes.
Just change it from 145 to 50, because somewhere else it's based on 150%. So we want them to align, and that makes it a lot easier. But there was also some Quimby money in the budget related to the.
Related to that, there's a little bit of a cost increase associated with it, but not
150.
Yeah.
the general fund.
Yeah. Okay. Quimby change? Any questions? We're okay with that?
Yep.
See it?
Good.
Okay. Thank you, Grady. Okay, now the main attraction. Emily
I
Burke.
wouldn't. I would.
We didn't already have David Sheets, we could call you Dave, Emily Sheets.
Oh, yeah, get it. It's a good one.
Do we want to talk about this?
Yeah, I don't want to present that, center lines. I don't want to present that, we should talk about it.
Okay, I'm good. We're gonna talk about it. Yeah, okay. I'm good.
Sorry, should we get a pen?
What about the modified slightly language? We should throw it in.
Slightly still around, you could have her come present.
As a final jest, we should throw it in.
Is she now the head of the Vermont superintendent? Is that,
I don't know, I haven't followed her.
she's somewhere in that same.
Yeah, Susan Stightly.
Maybe not, maybe she's getting.
She's vice chair of the Burlington Community Health Center. Or on the board,
Okay,
or chair,
probably.
somewhere.
Yeah. Okay, so Emily's gonna walk through the big sheet that we've been doing. We've got the balanced budget. Of course, we had to make a few changes to get it to be balanced, and last minute, this, that, and the other. But not a big difference, so there's not a lot of changes to go through.
Not a lot of changes. I'm gonna like do a quick, my computer will work.
So then we wanna go through.
Well, first I'm gonna do language, just to mix it up.
Whoa,
Like Brady threatened to talk that I was gonna do.
that's why you left, you didn't wanna see it.
Yeah. Right, didn't know.
You couldn't handle somebody else doing language.
So this,
have to do both hemispheres of your brain.
yes.
And then after Emily does the language and all the numbers, we're gonna do a straw poll on the book, where we are on the book. And then tomorrow we'll vote it out.
Cool. All right, I'm gonna share this. This is for the year-end closeout.
Is this the paycheck?
This is not the paycheck.
Yeah,
I mean, everybody should be happy. This is perfect. I don't know what the problem is.
It
Ah,
doesn't have my paycheck's name on
there you go. Okay, probably for the record, should introduce myself. In case anybody hasn't been paying attention at home over the last couple weeks, Emily Byrne from the Joint Fiscal Office. So the first thing we're gonna talk about is, this will go in B1101 for the fiscal year end 2025 closeout. So this is the exact same language that, well, mostly the exact same language that was in the FY 2025 Big Bill, Act 113, in terms of closing the fiscal year. So the, you'll recall in a lot of the conversations we've been having is that the FY 2025 budget construct relies on about $138.5 million of FY 25 money being carried forward into FY 26 to be allocated. So what this language does is says, the first thing the first thing that happens as part of closeout is finance and management executes the requirements of 32 BSA 308. 308 means they make sure that the stabilization reserve is fully funded at 5%. The next thing that they will do is designate the first $138.5 million of unallocated and unreserved funds to be carried forward into FY26 for FY26 purposes. Then, they have to do that notwithstanding 308C. Now what 308C is, as you'll recall, that's the language that says any unreserved and unallocated money after we put money into the stabilization reserve gets split 50% between the rainy day fund, and the other 50% is split again to the teacher's pension and the state employee's pension. So first do the stabilization reserve, then take 138.52 million and carry it forward into FY26. Then below this is some contingent appropriations. So then finance and management will calculate the maximum number of contingent appropriations that can be funded based on the list below and fund them in the order that they are below. And then anything left over after that will be reserved according to 32 VSA 308C, which is the rainy day fund and the pension allocations. So last year when this happened, we had $114 million approximately worth of contingent appropriation. First, we carried forward about $44 million into FY25. Then $114 million of contingent appropriations happened. And then about $34 million was allocated between the pension and the rainy day fund. So based on, we don't know what the total revenue will be at the end of FY25. Hopefully you all will have gone home to enjoy your summer break, and then we will get final revenues in, and then this is the language that finance and management will follow at closeout. So the two contingent appropriations that are on here, the first one, and this sort of is how we balance the FY 2026 big bill. But you'll recall there was a request for $15 million to be transferred from the general fund to the Communications and Information Technology Special Fund to cover their transitional billing costs. This would put $10 million of the sort of known funds into that fund, and then the first $5 million of unallocated at the end of the fiscal year would go to that fund to fully fund it. The next, for $45 million would be set aside and appropriated, and I can get into why it's appropriated this way when we go through sort of the rescission and federal funding language next. But so then $45 million would be appropriated to the Secretary of Administration solely to be transferred by the emergency board pursuant to the emergency board authority in the event that federal funds are reduced. So it basically just park $45 million in an appropriation. And if something happens with federal funds that mean that the state needs to step in and backfill some federal dollars, the emergency board can use their authority to transfer out of that appropriation. It's basically the same thing that happened with the treasurer's $20 million this past year, where there was an appropriation sitting out there and the emergency board pulled from it. This would sort of dedicate a specific appropriation, specific for this purpose, so that if there was a cut in federal funds that needed to be backfilled, we wouldn't have to find an existing appropriation within state government initially. Sort of state government could continue to operate. Otherwise, you'd have to find something that we could take money from to backfill. So this just parks it somewhere for that purpose. Yes.
And I'm assuming I know the answer to this, but if, let's say the amount of money was 25 million, the 5 million would be paid first and then the remaining 20 would be saved?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if there was 60 million, the first 5 would go to this fund, the next 45 would go to this special appropriation, and then the 10 would get allocated for
And it gets
statute.
split.
Yes, rainy day fund and then the 2 pensions.
And Emily, would it be, or would you have a problem with having a 3, just to make that clear, that when we get to B3, that it goes to the 308C construct?
So that's in the last sentence of subpart A, the any residual balance after such designations are reserved according to 32 BSA 308C.
Right.
So part A is the like, do this, then do this, then do this. And then part A, it refers to part B.
In order of B, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I think too, just like for what it's worth from JFO, you know, the 138.5, I know there's been a lot of conversations about that sort of being unavailable and unallocated at the end of FY25. And I think that money that's available is forecasted revenue. It could have been spent in 25 or 26. And I think the sort of original intent of the construct of 32 BSA 308C, the sort of reallocation, was really for any money that was sort of over and above the forecast that came in at the end of the fiscal year, not necessarily money that was left on the bottom line, you know, in order to balance both budgets. It was really any excess. So this sort of addresses that, like when we get to the excess, it's available for that purpose, as opposed to money that's left by how the budgets are constructed across 2 fiscal years, but it's known money. That makes sense.
So I have a question. What if things go well? Not if, what if things go horribly? So we're notwithstanding the normal waterfall into the pensions.
Yeah, partly, I would say.
Right. And so if that 45 million for some reason never got tapped by the E-board, it would have been split 3 ways if we hadn't not withstood. So my question is, when we come back next year, if we haven't used that 45 million, what do we do then? Do we acknowledge that we in effect stopped it from going into the pension funds? Or do we treat it as general fund that we can spend next year?
We could do either one. Right now, it would just be available for the DA.
Understood. I'm just wondering, rather than not discuss it and get into that situation next year, because I would imagine if you're the unions involved, you would say, we helped you out in an emergency. You didn't need the 45 million. There's a
or whatever the amount is.
Yeah. So not that we have to reach a decision now, because I think this language looks very good.
But you would suggest something that says like, of the 45 million that's not allocated by the E-board, it goes back to the 306C.
And I wouldn't tie our hands to that extent, because maybe there'll be a different emergency that we're facing. But I just raise it so that if we come in next year and that's the case, we have it on the table.
Point well taken. Okay. Any other questions, Williams? Okay,
Great, okay, so then the next piece of this is what happens if things go south with the federal government.
More so.
Yeah, more so.
Further south.
If they continue.
Past the equator.
Deep south.
yeah. All the way to the first.
To the Arctic.
So we don't have, we're still working with legislative council on finalizing language and wanted to sort of run it by or thinking by the committee before we draft anything up. So we can bring final language based on this conversation tomorrow. But, so in current law, there is rescission language, and I know, Catherine and I were in to speak about it, I think, earlier in the session. But so the rescission language that is in statute is to give the ability of the General Assembly and the executive branch to change the budget in the event there is a change in the revenue forecast while the General Assembly is not in session. It's based on, right, so we have the January forecast, that's what the budget is built on, and then in July, they'll adopt a new forecast. And if the revenues are reduced in any of the major funds, by the emergency board, then Secretary of Administration and Joint Fiscal Committee have some ability to reduce spending authority. The administration can implement a plan if a reduction is under 1%. So if the general fund is reduced by 1% or less, then the administration can make a plan to get the budget back in balance. They submit it to Joint Fiscal Committee as sort of an FYI. If the reduction is between 1 and 4% of revenues, then the Joint Fiscal Committee has to approve a plan that's presented by the Secretary of Administration. And there's rules around the timing of it and how all that works, but there's some back and forth and buy-in by those two. If the reduction is over 4%, the only way to reduce the budget is for the General Assembly to reconvene and act on it. One of the challenges in the sort of current construct is that while the Emergency Board adopts an estimated federal funds for the budget, they only adopt it in the July E-Board, and they adopt whatever the amount of federal funds is appropriated. Historically, they've adopted whatever the amount of federal funds is appropriated in the budget for that fiscal year. So if there's $300 billion that is appropriated in the FY26 budget, that's the number that would be adopted. The problem with that is it gives you no trigger to sort of go from. So for the general fund, you have a January revenue forecast, and you get an update in July. And if that change is whatever the percent change in that is, that's what would trigger the rescission process. But you have no starting point for the federal funds. So I think the first thing that we need to do in the language is sort of make an explicit, the sort of starting place for federal funds in case of any reductions is whatever's adopted in the budget. And then set up a structure whereby the Commissioner of Finance Management or the Secretary of Administration reports back to JFC, sort of as, you know, 3 known touch points, if you will, between the administration and the legislature to say things are changing, right? And if things change enough, then the emergency board can come back and adopt a new revenue forecast. That would be the difference between sort of whatever we sort of set as the starting point in the budget and what they come in and say, you know, we've lost revenue here or there, here's the number. Then what we've discussed in terms of sort of what that structure would look like, one of the challenges is if you have some entities that have a very small amount of federal funds and they lose a whole federal grant, that's a big portion of one entity's budget versus you have something like Medicaid that has a lot, you know, it's $1 billion of federal funds. There's a change there. You know, it's not a big percentage of their budget. So trying to come up with a way that we use the sort of federal funds that are appropriated in the big bill and have this sort of interaction between the administration and the legislature in terms of reporting back on what's going on with those federal funds, and to look at it at the sort of function of government level. So the budget's broken out right into general government protection, human services, education, labor. So looking at if there are any changes, either a 1% change in any one function's amount of federal funds, or $15 million. And $15 million is a number that JFO just kind of picked. It could be whatever. But sort of looking at it in terms of 1% of Medicaid is way more than $15 million. but 1% of, labor is less than $15 million. So sort of whichever is less, if you trigger that 1% by that government function, then the administration would come in with a plan to manage that reduction in federal funds to JFC. We want to try to mirror whatever's in the language to match the current rescission statute. So it would kind of at that government function level mirror, if it's less than 1% or less than the 15 million, then they can manage it on their own. If it's between 1 and 4, or or $50 million from one entity, then JFC gets involved. And if it's over that amount, then the General Assembly has to act on those changes. This is the sort of structure we're thinking about.
Okay, Senator Ruth?
Is this what is in the House's version?
No,
Okay, what are the differences?
that's a great question. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I should have been aware to.
It reminds me,
I mean, it's the general same,
right, but I'm just, before I could, I think it's an important comparison
Yeah.
to see what they did before we okay our own.
So, and we can do like a,
side
let
by side.
council does like a side by side sometime.
Sure.
We can do, this is what the House has proposed and this is sort of the structure that we've been thinking of. And JFO has met with the administration, I don't know that the administration has necessarily said this plan is brilliant and you should definitely do this, but we've gotten feedback from them in terms of what's workable and what things to think about.
On
I
page
would-
35.
35?
Mhm.
Senator Washington?
For those small departments that might get something more than we'll say more than the 4%. But if the total in all what didn't meet the 4%, then I would think that it would be incumbent upon the administration to at least come back to the Joint Fiscal Committee for single departments, if it was more than 4%, and present their plan.
Yeah,
And that would at least highlight where those smaller places are.
and I think it's still, we can make sure it still requires that, like, if anything happens, they have to report on what's happened and how they're managing it.
But
Regardless of the size, right?
I understand, but if we end up with a single department with, say more than the 4%, but the rest of state government holds it, whatever, that would highlight it would at least highlight it that we, and at least in front of joint fiscal, they'd have to make a presentation.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's department, it's within an agency, in transportation, we've got all sorts of stuff and we still don't know about a whole bunch of grants, but we know all the stuff to deal with electric charging stations is gone.
Right. And I think that is one of the tricky things is that there's, do you do it at, and I think that's why we sort of arrived at this area of government level.
Yep.
So that there isn't this like.
But if you do the area government level and the percentages across the board, there ought to be a trigger if you're a single division or department where they have to come back to joint fiscal to highlight the issue for us.
Yeah.
So I just looked through what the House did. This seems to me much better. It's more conservative. The House says, and the recommended reduction is limited to not more than 10% of any fund or 10% of any appropriation. So I like the triggers here. And this is in line with what the governor was saying in terms of when the General Assembly would come back.
And I think so. And I think that the House's language, I think, is actually a little more, I think it's 10% of any appropriation or fund, which is at a very, can be a very specific level. And I think that could be too restrictive, depending on where, and what's hard is that, like, you've got the Agency of Transportation, where you have Department of Vermont Health Access versus libraries and the Department of Labor, and like trying to build something that both is flexible in terms of the scale of some of these entities versus, you know, it's hard to apply the same logic to both very small departments and very massive departments. So that's why we sort of came up with this either or percentage or amount of money to try to deal with that problem.
Sarah Watson?
I think this is going back to something that Senator Westman was getting at, but I'm thinking about this line in each governmental function total, and I think because it's 1% or 15 million, whichever's less, in each governmental function total. And I guess I'm wondering about how we define that. Because, you know, if I was thinking about, you know, this one specific thing is gone, but then the following week something else is gone. You know what I mean? So it's 100% cancellation of something. But would we want to come back every time there's something small that goes away? Do you see what I'm saying?
The Department of Libraries or something, and it went over the 4%, but the whole of state government had got there. I think the best we can do is like go to joint fiscal.
Yeah, I guess I'm right. Like the Department of Libraries, it seems like that's a whole thing, you know. But if it's
or within, you know, because my mind's been in transportation lately, I wonder. But you know, we have program development, we have public transit, and those are separate appropriations within the agency's budget. If in one of those you went over the 4%, but that wasn't in the total, the place that you would highlight it would be to come back to joint fiscal.
I guess I'm wondering, like, should we be clear that is it per department, or is it per agency, or is it per
I would think
program?
I would think you'd want it with it, and using transportation. We have appropriations. It's program development. You have the maintenance division. You have public transit. You have rail. And I would think if you go over the 4% for any of those single appropriations, which are divisions within the agency.
That's not the way Jeff was looking at it. They're looking at it.
No, I know that's not the way, but when she brings up the question of what do we do if something goes over, I'm making the suggestion to refine that if it goes over 4% in one of those areas, they come back to joint fiscal and tell joint fiscal.
But not necessarily, no action needs to be taken by joint fiscal, but that there's that conversation. I think, so the function total, since he's not here, I'm gonna see this. I don't actually know if it's in here. Yeah, so if you go in, if you can see it in the web report, and if you go into the big bill, right, when you get to the numbers section, if you go, I'm not gonna find it. Anything that's B100 is general government. So in section B145, this is where we have this, you know, the totals for general government. And then anything that's B200, that's protection. B300 is human services. B400 is labor. B500, et cetera. So it would be by that, like you can kind of figure it out based on the first number of the B section.
Yeah.
And what I can do tomorrow, like to bring tomorrow when we bring the language, is have just a little table of like what those totals are by government function and what 1% or 5% would
But
be
you also
like.
have the dollar, you know, in here, so.
Yes. And whether or not, you know, like does 1% trip, is it more or less than 15 million, and just for perspective on that, right?
So is that the way you would draft this, that it would be in those functions?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I thought you said it would be totally government.
No, by the function. And that was our like creative solution to dealing with department is probably too small and all government is probably too big, right?
Right, well, I think if a department went over 4% and the rest of government didn't, as an add-on to this from above, that's when they ought to go to joint
Yes.
fiscal.
And the other, in terms of like trying to solve problems that you don't know what they are yet, with Medicaid, for example, that depending on what happens in Medicaid, if anything, right, maybe nothing happens, but it crosses departments, right? So if it's if there's a change in eligibility, right, that could hit Dale and DMH and the health department and DEVA, right, and a different rate. So like that, trying to figure out how you
There's 10
manage all
different,
of that.
there's 10 different functions of government, so it breaks it up.
Okay, so it's defined.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's we're on page 5 of this bill, passed. If you look, at the bill, they're listed.
I think the other thing to point out that I know that the House version had was sort of having JFC make recommendations to the emergency board about using, about the emergency board taking action. And I think through the closeout language that we went through that sets aside the up to $45 million, the emergency board can sort of act independently if something triggers that they need to backfill immediately without waiting for JFC, without waiting for a plan. They can sort of take that action, and then it can be I don't think it precludes JFC from recommending to the E-board that they make transfers to deal with a reduction, but it wouldn't require JFC to make a recommendation to the E-board before the E-board acts.
So we'll see more refined language
Yes.
tomorrow.
If this all makes sense, which it sounds like it does, then we've got it most of the way there. So, and I should have thought, my computer's not working, Elle, so I might have you share stuff, if that's okay. If you want me to share stuff, I assume you do. All right, so now we want to look at spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Always. I'm trying to think which spreadsheet to start with. I'm going to start with the cash fund just to mix it up a little.
Yeah, we haven't talked about it.
We haven't really talked about it. It's a good lead in for.
Nobody has been in here has been on institutions. Were you ever on institutions?
No. I think it's the only place that has been.
We should. And we'd have to move you off this. Okay. So what you have in front of you is an overview of the cash fund that I know the institutions committee is working on, and I got winds of at least one very small change in terms of who's receiving some money, but no changes to the numbers. So the governor, the important line, I should have put numbers on this and I didn't. So the second line down, the transfers from the general fund, that's sort of the line of excitement, if you will, for this committee when it comes to the cash fund. So the governor recommended a transfer of $14.8 million from the general fund to the cash fund. The House reduced that to $7.5 million.
And that's what we started with in here. We thought we had that difference between the GovRec and the House Rec. We were counting on that.
And in the sort of conversations between the institutions committee and here, my understanding is there was a decision to increase the amount coming from the cash fund, going to the cash fund, from the general fund, to try to keep with the spirit of the law, which says that 4% of the general fund prior year appropriations net the debt service amount should go to the cash fund. But along with that additional funding went some of the appropriations from that this committee has talked about that are, sort of that are walk and talk more like capital investments than sort of operating type budget investments. So the Senate position that they're working on across the hall right now, some of the big changes, they've determined that the Windsor County Courthouse can take a little bit of a haircut, can get some more money in out years.
Where's that on?
Oh yeah, that's on line BF
renovation of Windsor County Courthouse. It was 8 million in the House version, it's gonna go to 6.9 million in the Senate version. Okay. On line 2, with the Vermont Veterans Home, the House did a reallocation up above and then added 1.5 million, and the incubator farm is actually gonna show up below, so we're gonna take that, you can ignore that, line B for now. On line 3, sub A, the Department of Health grant for the recovery residency purchase, that's been talked about, I believe, that they're looking at money, a place in St. Albans. And in some of the conversations happening across the hall, the money's actually gonna go to ACCD, not the Department of Health. But the appropriation will still be made out of the cash fund. On line 4, there was, funding in the governor's original capital bill for investments, related to housing, I believe in Brattleboro, Bennington, and Barry. The Senate Institutions Committee wanted to restore that funding, so they've restored the full amount of, the House was carrying a $2 million appropriation in the big bill, so that will come out of the Senate version. There's the $100,000 for the study of the federal building and the parking lot behind the federal building. Line 5A is the fire apparatus that was in the House's budget. This is being moved to the cash fund. And line 6, for the Department of Fish and Wildlife, they'll do
Was it in the House budget? I don't think it was.
the fire apparatus. Yeah. Line 6A, the Lake Champlain Walleye Association.
Oh, yeah.
Institutions Committee would like to do that, make that appropriation out of the cash fund, along with $35,000 for a dry hydrant grant program. And then the last line, this would go to the Agency of Agriculture. There's a proposal to do an incubator farm at the Vermont Veterans Home for $45,000. So that would bring the total uses of the cash fund to 15 million. That increase, this is based on the Senate version would increase the transfer to the cash fund by $2.73 million as compared to the House. And it would be $4 million less than the governor's recommend.
One question. So the purchase of the recovery residence, it's not will it or will it not be a state building? It will be a state building. It won't be a state building. So that's why it's not BGS.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is, what's it called, the Grove, something Grove?
Hope Grove Recovery
Right,
Center. This is
right.
they got it under contract.
Nice.
The deck and ground swimming pool out back, it's a nice facility. Level 3 certification.
Okay, so
All
we're
right.
made that kind of negotiation with the Institutions Committee on this construct.
So in that language will show up in the Appropriations Act. Because there is intent language in the institutions bill, and then there is the actual appropriations to happen in the big bill. So you'll see that tomorrow in the final bill. The next sheet, this is a quick one. You've seen this a couple times. This is the,
Did Phil get one?
what?
Did Phil get one of these?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the transfers and direct applications. Just wanted to highlight on this supplemental sheet, the changes in the Senate version. There are only 2 changes, sorry. The first one is the environmental contingency fund. So going back to the governor's position for the PCB remediation. And then on this last one, the cash fund transfer. So this is updating it based on the spreadsheet we just looked at by 2.73 million.
And you'll notice some of the things on here that we used to talk about in the VA. It's like the liquor control, the sports wagering, these kind of changes down at the bottom. Direct app transfers.
Yeah.
And the unclaimed property, I thought that number was changing.
It is not, it's all good.
Oh,
You know,
yeah,
there was a little bit of excitement this morning and then it's good.
Okay, so we can keep it with that number, okay, good,
Yes,
because it was gonna change in the wrong way.
yes, and it's not gonna change in the wrong way. At least not today.
Yeah.
Maybe in the budget adjustment. Assuming there is one, when we get there. Okay, this one is also a fast one, just to be thorough. This is the reversion summary. The only change from the House to the Senate is reverting the remaining $5 million that's in the treasurer's bond redemption appropriation. This would sweep all of this into the general fund.
It's 5 million because it was to the treasurers, because it was 14 plus the 1 for the medical bill.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we're taking it.
All right. Onto the base. Budget, should look familiar.
Start on the purpose.
Yes. So what's highlighted in yellow on this sheet are just the changes from Friday. And so the budget that we have today, the bottom line on the one-time sheet is at 0. So this gets everything in balance at this point. So I will start, there's no changes at the top in the purple. That stays the same. On line 5 and line 6, so the Joint Legislative Management Committee made a decision on Thursday afternoon to move one position from the sort of Human Resources Division in the legislature to the Legislative Council. We wanted to make sure that was corrected in the budget, so it reflects where that position will actually be in FY26. So this moves as a net neutral move of $170,000 from the legislature to the Legislative Council. It doesn't really affect, it doesn't affect the bottom line at all, but it will show up in the web report as a change. The next change, so there is no change on the state's attorneys and sheriffs. They are just, I know there was some continued conversation about that, but I think that sort of, as my understanding, the position is each of them would get $650,000, and then we can do language that directs it either to, for new positions or to use in, you know, to either reduce their vacancy savings or to use to fill, to help fill positions that.
Because this reduces their vacancy savings down to 0, but they're both big enough entities that they're gonna have vacancy savings.
Probably.
So that, if they need to use that vacancy savings for something else, there's definitely flexibility.
The on line 14-208, the Office of the Defender General, I believe this was changed a little bit, but this reflects $60,000 for training and $58,000 for increased costs for their assigned counsel contracts.
Do we have, further down, so where's Emily? They had 50, 60, 70,000, they wanted $50,000 one-time funding for the Addison County.
It's on the one time.
It's on a one-time,
It should-
okay.
And when we get there, we can make sure we got it
Thank you.
correct. This is the ODG. On line 19, the $40,000 for the firearms is added back in.
I gotta go back to one more.
Okay?
Yeah.
Under line 13, where it
Yep.
says sheriff's transport deputies, that's not quite the way that it was presented. They want their $650,000 vacancy savings back, same as the Defender General's office. the two positions out of the deputies is additional funding for those. That was 142 apiece, plus their one-time, IT and fiscal person.
The IT person,
Is it on here?
was on your,
Yeah.
on the position list.
Yep, but I don't see it here, though, I'm saying. Oh, it's on a position list? Okay,
It's on the position.
okay, good.
But do they not need the money for it?
They do need the money for it, yes. It's three positions. We started at 6, we started at like 26, now we're down to 3.
Figure out how to hire somebody.
Well, there were some other
Yeah,
positions where
we-
they said they didn't need the money, they just need the authority for the position.
Right, both the ODG and SAS have those limited service positions they just want to convert to full-time and have the money, both has the money for it.
So we're doing those. So I think we were thinking that through the vacancy savings is where that position money would be coming from. Is that right? Because so that's the language saying, from your vacancy savings that we know you'll have, you will be able to use that money for that IT position. That's created.
Well, I guess they have no choice about it, that's where they have to take it from.
Right, but about the increase in the transport deputies is listed here. But are you saying they have vacancy savings plus the transport deputies?
The original plan was they both want their 650,000 vacancy savings back because they'd have to cut positions.
They both had the same amount of.
Same amount, correct? 650.
So I think the sort of challenge is if it I don't know that it eliminates the vacancy savings in both, I believe it does, but sort of, yeah, trying to balance, will they be really fully staffed for the full year? Or can they use some of this
Right,
vacancy savings,
that's a
right?
good
Like,
point, yeah.
can they hold some position, like positions turnover, right? At different rates at different places, right? All over state government for lots of different reasons.
And finding officers right now is not a readily accessible thing to start with. So it's gonna take a while to fill those positions.
And can they, within this money, can they, fill what they can fill if they have vacancies, hold stuff open to balance their budget? We could add in additional money, but we'd have to find savings elsewhere to do it.
And the positions are created, but I think we thought we would
Use the vacancy savings.
please use.
Okay. I just have
Yeah.
to fight for what they wanted, okay, so it's not my final decision, obviously. But just to say, there's a lot of other new positions being created here. Just putting that out there.
Yeah, well, we created the position. And I think at one point, yeah.
And we're only looking at 3.
Keep going?
Yep.
Okay. So we talked about line 19, the firearm replacement. I'll take the note off of that, but that's back in at the governor's position. I guess I should flag per the conversation you had earlier about the rate increases and whether or not those would get pushed back. So there's the rate increases for, I believe the language referred to the FQHC rate increases, which is 4.4 million of general fund and 10.7 of federal funds. And then the 2% provider rate increases was the other one that was referred to.
It's line 29,
Line 29 and
Line 30.
32.
not 30.
Not 30.
Okay, it's not clear in the amendment, I was just looking at it, because it just says B 301
Right,
completely.
okay.
So it's all of B 301, which is pretty extensive, and then, so.
You're saying it's line 29, line 31 and 32?
Yeah, I'm not, well, and so I guess that's the conversation for the committee. I think those are all of the rate increases that are in here. I think for line 30, since that is 85,000, it depends on the committee's goal, right? which I've heard is sort of twofold, right? To maintain flexibility in the event of a big change in federal funds. But also recognizing that there are, you know, real needs out there among providers in terms of rates. And how to sort of strike that balance. I think what this maintains, and maybe is more language that we should add, this puts the full amount of those rate increases into the base, but then the language says don't implement them until later. So the money would be in AHS's budget to do it. So then when we got to 27, if the rate increases went into effect on November 1st, then the money would be in the budget to keep doing them into the future, right? Like sometimes historically when we've said, here's 6 months worth of rate increases, it just puts future pressure on the future budget because first thing you have to fund is the remaining 6 months of rate increases.
So if you put it on hold and then something extraordinary happens and you decide to keep it at that lower level for the reimbursement rates, you've automatically put those providers in jeopardy. If you begin with the payment and then have a contingency for reducing it going forward, it allows for some accommodation on the part of the providers.
We thought it would be hard to like give it to them, they'd have it for 3 months, and then on the 4th month say, now we gotta reduce. They'd have to like reduce people's salary or something.
They're gonna have to do it anyway, I think. I mean, you'll have to hear from folks, but. Okay. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that.
Maybe you could identify for tomorrow a list of those items
Pick
that
up the
would be
ACO.
open.
Huh?
But got payments to the ACO.
Yeah, those pieces are important to look at.
Okay, we'll get a list of them all so you can see which ones we're talking about tomorrow. Before you
Yeah, good.
vote, and if there's any key ones that
Yeah.
we would be able to do. Okay, so that's the first page.
That's the first page. Everything else we talked a lot about. Line 51, the Green Mountain Care Board. This is related to the implementation of S-126. This was originally at 5 positions. This has been reduced to 3 positions, and I believe you were spoken about that earlier when you were going through the position list. Line 61, in Fish and Wildlife, this has the $150,000 for an additional position to help with the implementation of Act 181. And then on line 72, there was additional funding for a position at the Ethics Commission, and that has been removed as part of this. And then the last one that's highlighted in yellow, line 76, the amount that will be unreserved for the budget stabilization reserve. So this is based on the FY 2025 budgetary changes. So the stabilization reserve is 5% of prior year appropriations. So the big change, the change that's in the FY 2025 construct in the Senate based on, you know, putting the budget adjustment into the big bill is that the House's version of the budget of the FY 2025 changes that was in whatever iteration of the budget adjustment included the full appropriation to the treasurer's office, or included $4 million of the appropriation to the treasurer's office for bond redemption. The Senate construct eliminates that. What that in effect does is reduces the FY 2025 appropriations, which means we can reduce the transfer to the stabilization reserve accordingly. So that throws off at $200,000 that we don't have to put into the reserve next year. It's the long answer.
Which helps with your whole end of year conscience, because on another 0.8 million, that might get to the.
Yes. So that is everything on here. I will say the only thing that is not on here that we'll have to add tomorrow is related to the Department of Labor and the Agency of Education, adult education change. I will say, and maybe we should review it tomorrow. I was looking at the appropriations to the Agency of Education related to adult education, and I think what I didn't notice when we spoke earlier is there is about $1 million of federal funds that's for adult education. That is that we don't control the fact that money goes to the Agency of Education. So if we move part of the appropriation to the Department of Labor, I don't know what we do about the federal funds, and I don't know what that does generally. So we should look at that and talk about it.
I'll look at that.
And then figure out what we should do, but I don't know why I didn't look at that when we talked earlier.
Sorry.
But no, it's okay. I was trying to remember all the things we need to do to execute all the things, and when I looked, I was like, oh, we'll have to move it on the web report, and I don't know. That might be a problem, or a challenge to overcome. Anyway, any questions on the base? Okay, so this will all of these changes will be reflected in the web report, which we'll give you tomorrow when we go through the budget. Now,
Noel, do you want to?
Oh, yes.
okay, so the last spread, well, I have another one more, just for fun. But this is the one-time appropriations spreadsheet. So we're assuming the 38.52 that was referred to in the language and that we've looked at on the sorry, Alice, remove the green on
Summary or the.
not the summary one, the changes. No, I don't, the increase, I can't remember what it's called.
What?
There's two one-time spreadsheets that I sent Elle, and I didn't tell her which one to bring up. So you'll figure it out. It has a green on. That's the one. Okay. So the 138.52 is what we're assuming is carried forward from FY25. That's the number that's in language. And then the last spreadsheet had 29.14 on the bottom line, which is the base funding used to cover one-time appropriations in terms of changes. So on here, I think there's probably two conversations we should have. So I'll go through the yellow, same thing. The yellow is the change from Friday. In line 15, 16, and 17, these reflect the updates to the appropriations that will go to the Agency of Human Services for the implementation of S-126, the healthcare bill that were spoken about earlier. And this very light colored green on line 19, this is where you see the fire apparatus, which is going to go over to the cash fund. The spreadsheet we looked at earlier. Line 25, same thing, the St. Albans building for the recovery residencies. That I should put the amount in there. The 250 going over to the cash fund for that project. On line 29 is the $500,000 that was discussed on Friday for CVOEO Community Center. On line 32, this one was not talked about on Friday, but
Is that what it's called, the Community Resource Center? This is the low barrier shelter, is that what they call it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
This one on line 32, this one was not talked about on Friday, but at the request of the chair, this one was added. This is additional funding to help with the administration. Well, I believe it was talked about a couple days ago when we talked about childcare. Right. But this was added funding to help with the administration of meals for home-based childcare. This would go to the Agency of Education, who does the administration of all of the child nutrition programs. On line 36, $30,000 to the Department of Fish and Wildlife for the Lake Champlain International Fishing Derby. It's talked about on Friday.
For those that live near the lake, they can go and
We're very grateful.
On line 41, this one isn't changing, but just to point out that we're going to redesignate B1100 N3 to the first time homebuyer program. It was the rental revolving loan fund, so there'll be $1 million for first-time home buyers. And then on line 42, we'll retitle, this appropriation to be $13.5 million for the middle income homeownership development program or the reventing revolving loan fund. However, VHFA wants to allocate it. So create some flexibility for VHFA and how they deploy it. On line 43, this is the funding for VHIP. This continues it as a one-time appropriation, but it also adds the position back that the House removed from the governor's recommend. So it adds another 150,000. Yeah, no.
Is that position on your position? Well, yeah, well, I think I don't know if that's what they want to do with it, if not in the base. I was thinking we would add the money in and they would have, I guess, decide.
They can decide, right?
They decide maybe they come back in DA and say, so they could just spend more money or they could do the position.
Perfect. Okay, and on line 44, this was the grant for the housing development and the Montpelier housing study that's been moved to the cash fund. On line 49, on the other page, we have $1 million for brownfield revitalization. I believe it was $2 million on Friday, but to get to balance, in conversations with the chair, this was reduced by $1 million. On line 54, we have the $840,000 for the comprehensive payment reform that was talked about as coming off, but it is now back on the list. Okay. Line 59, the farm to school grants. This was at $1.2 million. This was reduced by $200,000 in the sort of constructs to get this balance. The line 68, the local support for local civic journalism, I think I just highlighted that because we updated the explanation for it. Made it more clear what it is, so that might just be a note for myself. I probably should have highlighted for Senator Norris, but to check on line 73 through 75, these are the one-time appropriations for the Office of the Defender General. And I should put explanations in here.
And thank you, and Defender General, thank you.
Great.
Is that the 60,000?
That was on
60,000
the base. We put that in the base.
That really wants that 60,000.
That's what I got.
And then on line 76, we have the Land Use Review Board of the RPC mapping funds.
Yes.
Just to be clear, it is for,
Not for the,
oh no, it is, but it's for, digital infrastructure for them to accept, applications from the RPCs. So it's related and.
or to like actually accept the maps and be able to integrate them into their work.
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah,
So
so.
like, I thought it was like accept mapping proposals or grant requests or something.
No, this is for the tier one.
Yeah.
Applications, 1A, 1B. And also just a note, this is not important at all, but on the far right most column, you've got.
Oh yeah,
For
I
the
need to
notes,
add those.
yeah. It's not a part of influencing reference-based pricing.
I do have a quick question.
Yeah, Senator Norris.
Yeah, I'm just looking at like line, I got a couple examples, line 48, where you've got 20,000, then off to the right, there's 15,000.
Yes.
And then again, down on, prenatal doula certification, you got 30,000, it says 25,000. Am I missing something or what?
It's because it's rounded.
$5,000 rounded?
Rounds up by $5,000, so
Okay.
it's just to make it clear. It may be a little arbitrary where I put the more specific number, but on the little ones, I tried to put specifically how much it is.
Thank you.
So I can go down.
But when we look at the web report, well, I can look at the last spreadsheet, the final spreadsheet of today, but when you look at the web report and this last spreadsheet will have everything to the dollar, so you can see what all that is. But, okay, I'll update
Just don't put the cents.
no pennies, we don't deal in pennies. I will not bore you with my theories on how it's a little crazy we still appropriate to the dollar, but that's for another day.
And then line 80, if that happens, we will just deal with it some other way.
In conference committee, yes. We will have to find some money if money is needed. Yeah, you decide to.
So what would be considered going beyond this budgeted amount?
So you're budgeted for 18 weeks. I do not remember off the top of my head, that's sometime in mid-May.
Yeah.
So if it goes anywhere past mid-May, it's $300,000 a week. And then there is,
Well, we started late.
May 9th will be that.
you start a little
May
late.
9th was 18 weeks?
So you started a little late, so you can go a little later, I think, than you have in the past, but, if you go over that, it's 300,000. I think too, I think it's probably too soon to talk about whether, like, whether or not money needs to be set aside for a special session, depending on what the federal government is gonna do, so I think that's also in the air. But the last few things that are highlighted, so on, line 89 is the Computer Technology Modernization Fund bill chain. This was at the governor's recommend to bring the budget into balance. $5 million was moved to the contingency list, so that is not fully funded in the budget, but there is hopefully a plan for making sure that that transaction is fully met. On line 91, this is the updated cash fund transfer, so that in that difference line, that's the $2,730,000 additional general funds that will go to the cash fund. And then I think the very last line, the farm security grants, can't remember if it was a different number on Friday, but
It
that,
keeps going down. It was at 4 and then went to 2 and then now it's
I
up.
think it was at 7.
Oh,
Oh,
7.5.
7 was the ask, yeah.
7.5.
Or it was 20 was the ask. Ag got it to 7. To balance the budget, we had to cut that back to 1. And then, when you say to the cash fund, and I know I asked you this before, but does that stay in the capital bill or does we appropriate it?
You're gonna appropriate, well, it's appropriated in the big bill, the House version of the big bill. The plan is to appropriate it in the,
And leave the cash fund, or put all the cash fund expenditures from the capital bill will be in the big bill.
in the big bill, yeah. And the capital bill does intent language that says, in the Appropriations Act, make the following appropriations, and then the appropriations bill makes the following appropriations. It's kind of similar to the T-bill construct, where the T-bill has this is how we want you to spend all the money, and then the Appropriations Act is which actually spends all the money.
And were you also gonna move the Lake Champlain International into the cash fund? So they can be swimming with the walleyes, or do we wanna keep the two separate?
We could put it in the cash fund if you want to.
No, I didn't know if that was discussed.
It's,
I mean, I don't know why the walleyes isn't over there either, but.
that's a great question. It was probably, I think the LCI was in the capital bill or in the cash fund last year, so it may be appropriate to move it over there, and that,
Yeah,
Actually, I think it was in the big bill.
it was in the big bill?
Yeah.
what's the walleye do with it? Cause I thought I.
No, while I was.
Walleyes that have been.
Always did. Well, we can keep it in the big.
It's kind of fishy.
It is.
So, nice.
So the
Okay,
very last spreadsheet that I have, which I'm not gonna walk through all of it, but it's happened in the House too, that there is,
there's nothing on this sheet that wasn't on the sheet we just looked at.
correct,
It's
this
just
is.
Presented differently.
And I think this one will be helpful on the floor potentially. This one restates the one-time appropriations, but what this does is has both the general fund and all of the other funds that are being appropriated. So if you look in the third column where it says fund, it will tell you what the special fund is that spending authority will be created out of. And then it shows up in the other fund column. So all of the general fund ones should match the sheet that we just walked through. But since there are some things that were general fund in the House budget that are moving to different special funds, I thought it would be important to just sort of show this. And then when you look at the web report, you'll see the very first one and this one was actually in the House version, but in line 3 in the Agency of Administration, oh no, this is a new one for you, sorry. So line 3, the Agency of Administration, from the pilot special fund, $1 million for the Municipal Technical Assistance Program. That was, I think the governor had asked for $3 million worth of general fund for this. This puts a little bit of money into that program. Additionally, on line 5, this one was in the House version, and it's also in the Senate version.
And in the governor's budget.
And in the governor's budget. Yes, this one was in the governor's budget. From the pilot special fund, the municipal grand list stabilization program. So this is for towns that did municipal buyouts or that need a little bit more money to make up for their grand list loss when they do buyouts after a disaster. All right, I'm going to skip over line 11, which is the federal match. On
Is there the language on that municipal grand list stabilization is that even though it's in one time, just a 5-year?
Yes, there's language about it.
Intent?
Yeah. Line 20 is the recovery residencies from the Substance Misuse Prevention Fund. So this Substance Misuse Prevention Fund is the 30% of the cannabis receipts. So Ted was in last week or earlier this week. I don't know. I guess it's only Tuesday. It was last week. And he talked about there being projected additional funds in the Substance Misuse Prevention Fund. So the House had $300,000 of general fund. The Senate proposal is to increase it by $500,000 and to move it to the Substance Misuse Prevention Fund for a total of $800,000. Additionally, on line 21 from the Substance Misuse Prevention Fund is $200,000 for youth mentoring services. And then on line 22, from the tobacco fund, the additional funding for the parent-child centers. So this would be an additional $500,000 worth of spending from the tobacco fund. There is, in FY26, there's projected to be money in the tobacco fund. This just reduces the amount of carry forward into FY27. It means there'll be a bigger hole to fill in 27. The ones in green, I should flag this earlier, the ones in green are the items that moved to the cash fund. These will come off this spreadsheet, but just wanted to show them for just to highlight where they're going. There's another important one. Oh, so B38, line 38, the Environmental Contingency Fund. This is the spending of the Environmental Contingency Fund for PCB testing and remediation. This is, you see it twice because there's a transfer into the special fund and then the spending out of the special fund. This shows the increase to $9.5 million for PCB testing and remediation. I don't know that we've talked a lot about it, but on line 39 is the appropriation of the match for IIJA funds to the Department of Environmental Conservation, so that they can finish up the clean water and drinking water projects. I'll go to the next page. There's other ones to highlight. Some global commitment funds appropriated. In the Agency of Transport, or in the Transportation section, you'll see on line 68, Y2 is the $1.4 million of one-time funds appropriated for the level 1 and the level 2 charging stations. On line 3 is the transportation appropriation for the non-emergency medical transport grants for $600,000. And then on line 4 is the $1.15 million appropriated from the pilot special fund for the non-federal emergency repairs. I'm not sure I have that explanation right, but that's that appropriation. And then the last one there's two more that are in, not in the general fund. So for the Green Mountain Care Board in line 77 from the HIT fund, $150,000. This is related to S126 to standardize the submission of the electronic hospital budget, the budgets from hospitals to standardize the electronic submission. And then on line 82, the very last one is the cash fund appropriations that we just talked about. That'll be in B1103. For $14 million that we just talked about on the cash fund. That's it.
So just forgot that they were the same things on both sheets. I'm like, that was on the other sheet. I'm like, they're all on the
I
other.
hope it's on both sheets. The goal is for it to be on both sheets.
Yeah. Okay, any questions about the one time? You'll notice on the end of the one-time sheets, at the total difference between one-time spending and revenues is 0. That is just a sign of a balanced budget. Which is a good thing.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions? Yeah.
So I was out of the room and maybe you had said this, but is there some place where the changes you made to balance the budget are represented just those?
The yellow highlights on both the base sheet and
Okay, so the yellow highlights, some of them are positive and some of them are negative?
yep.
I did not put together a sheet that showed the ups and downs, if you will, from Friday to today. But the yellow ones are the ones that are
I
different.
was just looking for the downs.
Yes, the big down is the $5 million for the ADS
Yeah.
thing, and
That was because I think when we left on Friday, it was like 6.8 million we had to cut, so the 5 million cut most of it.
yeah, and there were some ups. You added some stuff on Friday, so it was more than $6 million.
Because we had like that equalization change, there was a little change, we found a little money.
Found a little money, we added a little money.
When we corrected some things.
Doesn't look appreciably different except for that one that you mentioned.
Yeah, no, and luckily we were able to add a couple things.
Yeah.
Like the fishing derby, things like, those low cost things we were able to finish at the end. Okay, so any questions for Emily or anything else about the process? So want to just do a straw vote to see where everybody is on the budget at this point. So I've never done a straw vote before, so I guess I want to know if anybody is thinking about not voting for it. Or by a show of hands, who would vote for this budget tomorrow? Thank you, appreciate it. Works to try to get everybody's support. I know Centerline doesn't like the Westman construct. They're gonna arm wrestle later, but we'll figure it out.
I got.
I don't know how I got tagged.
What was your idea originally?
Didn't go in?
Right, I think so tomorrow we will have for the committee the web report, these things finalized, the bill itself for you to review. And if there are any things that we come across, so we're gonna work this evening to get it ready to go. If we come across anything like, oops, that was supposed to be 300 and it was a 30 and now I need 200, we'll let you know as soon as we know. And then present any of those things first thing and then give you the bill to look at and hopefully.
So we'll probably have them present all the web report and not go through it all, but here it all is. And then we'll break for 2 hours.
Oh, we have to run through the transportation.
And then we have the transportation bill. So it kind of,
And capital bill.
capital bill we don't have to do.
No.
Because I don't even know if they're done.
It's not a committee.
It's not on a committee. They're planning on voting it out
Yeah,
today, but then it would go to the floor and be here.
we have their money sectioned off.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
and hopefully they don't spend more. Hopefully we would just amend it in here if they did that, I guess. So is the floor gonna be long tomorrow? We don't know.
Well, probably.
There were several things I've noticed, yeah. So maybe we start at 2. I guess we'll do 2, T-bill at 2. Go over that real quick. Hand out the budget, have people read it, and then vote on it a couple hours later. Does that make sense?
I would rather we do T-bill, so it is on notice on Friday.
Okay, so that means we gotta get it done tomorrow.
No, that means
Oh, Thursday, okay. So we could not do the T-bill tomorrow. We could do that.
We may need, let me check with Logan and Damien to make sure that we grab everything that needs to be in the big bill,
Yeah,
based on what the T-bill's gonna look like.
there's a couple of things, a couple of amendments that we need to make in here.
Right, choose that.
So the non-medical transport and then non-federal emergency disaster fund.
And.
So maybe we just better to do that Thursday, have another day. Although we just can't, we're gonna pass the budget assuming that there's no changes to the people. We're not gonna change it.
Well, we got 3 in here.
So let's not do the T-bill tomorrow. That gives us more time, because
Are you presenting a T-bill?
No,
next week. Because you'll have to read the entire budget, which will be whatever, 100 and something. Let's look
chair
through
and vice chair.
the spreadsheets. So you're not gonna do new spreadsheets, these are, unless you have a mistake or something.
I mean, I will probably reprint them for the web that has final and the right date on it and all that jazz, but I won't give them to you unless you really want them.
Yeah. So you'll have some time to read through it to make sure everything that you want is in there, and as long as that is correct. Not everything you want is in there, but everything you expected from today is in there.
Everything you know to be true.
Yeah. And let us, then, any questions or corrections, we have time. But then we would make those and then vote the bill out. With that, we can adjourn for the day.